Hi everyone, James here. Welcome to another video. This video is a request video. I believe it's the first one I've ever actually done. This is for two people who don't make videos, or rather one of them has a couple of videos, but they're not vinyl videos. I think they're about his dog, from what I've seen. There's Baz Carr and Audiosaurus. So thanks guys, regular commenters on my videos. So yeah, it's always great to hear from people who don't make videos as well. Anyway, so Baz and Audiosaurus have asked if I would show my music book collection, which is something I've been meaning to do for a long time. So I thought, it's the festive season, let's do it. So I have a fair few music books. I don't have the biggest collection of music books. Check out Flipside CT, his collection dwarfs mine. But I'll show you what I have, and let's hope this video doesn't get too long. Okay, so this is a large format book which I absolutely love. This is AC/DC, and how many people out there could just sit and stare at me doing that all day? It's a great book, this. I had it for my birthday maybe 3 years ago. Large format book containing lots of lovely pictures and images of the boys, a really good history. Each album gets its own little write-up, and it's just a really enjoyable book. You know, it's just full of content. It's not just a coffee table book, but it actually contains some, you know, a wealth of information. So let's just do that again for the benefit of those people who are having a stressful day. God bless Malcolm Young, rest in peace. So some other large format books that I have. This is the classic Rolling Stones. This is the one they brought out after the Beatles anthology. I mean, the Stones always copied the Beatles back in the 60s. Every time the Beatles did anything, the Stones would immediately do something similar, and they kept on doing that right through their career. This is a great book. It's them telling their own story. It's an enjoyable romp. It goes all through their career, and it's Brian Jones there. Well worth picking up. When I bought this, it was $9.99. I don't know if it's the same price now. So there's that one. Another good Stones book which is worth picking up is this one. This is Bill Wyman's Blues Odyssey. After he left the Stones, Bill turned into a bit of a evangelist for the blues, and he wrote, or I suspect it was written for him and he put his name to it, but hey, let's not be pernickety. This is just a great book about the blues. It does go into excruciating detail, and it's a bit of a head spinner as books go. But he goes into the geography and you know, all the different historical aspects of the blues. There's a profile on each of the great bluesmen. So yeah, a very enjoyable book. I need to twist behind me. I have some more large format books around here. Hang on a sec. What you can't see is I have the dog next to me as well, so that's proving a little bit tricky to get organised. Pink Floyd, this is the book that was written by Ron Geesin, the guy who helped them make Atom Heart Mother. And it's an account of the making of that album. Very enjoyable, and contains some lovely photographs from Abbey Road, 1970 I believe. It's a nicely produced book. I'm being really random. This is Bill Bruford, some drum transcriptions written by him. It's falling apart. I used to use this a lot back in the day when I still had ambitions to be some kind of prog rock drummer. That never really transpired. There's Bill there, sat at his incredible Simmons drum kit, which he used to play with King Crimson, and which always used to malfunction. This is a great book, really enjoyable. This is John Cale's Autobiography, What's Welsh for Zen. Very interesting book. Contains pictures and text. The dog's on the move. Let's have a look and see if I can find some pics for you. It's always hard when you're trying to do this to the camera. Interesting book. It charts his development from his childhood onwards. He went to America on a musical scholarship and met Lou Reed, and the rest is history. Another large format one which is going to be hard to lift into shot. Here we go. This is Genesis chapter and verse. A bit like the Beatles anthology, a bit like the Rolling Stones. This is just a big coffee table sized book, but it's not just pictures, it tells the complete story of the band in their own words. So that's quite a nice one to have. This one's a bit of a rarity. This is the Electric Light Orchestra story by the drummer Bev Bevan. This was purchased in the pre-internet days, really, pre-eBay, pre-Amazon. I can't remember where I tracked it down, but look, we have Sharon Osbourne there, and she was still Sharon Arden. A fun book, but rather sexist and dated in some of its attitudes. I've got a lot of piano transcriptions books. I do play the piano, although I haven't played for a long time. This is The Loneliest Monk, a collection of his tunes. I did learn one of the pieces from here, and going back to my classical training, I had to put a number next to every single note, so I knew which finger to play which note. It was a mind-boggling feat. It took about a year to learn a 12-page piece. I'm a sucker for punishment. This is one of my favourite music books. This is the drum book. Traces the history of the British and American drum set. Shows you photographs of all the great classic drum kits, you know, Ringo Starr's drum kit, Charlie Watts's kit and so on. Let's see if I can find some good pics for you here. It explains how the drum kit evolved and so on. I bet I'm boring some people now. I know some people find the topic of drums deeply, deeply boring. There are some good kits from the 70s here. That's Charlie Watts's drum kit. I promised to get off the drum book and do something else very soon. Okay. John Bonham. Just a wealth of detail. Great book. Okay, so these are in no particular order. I need to do some reshelving, and in fact I'm going to use this video as an excuse to get some shelving done, as in some alphabetizing. So I'm just going to grab things off the shelf and see what comes up. This is a great book. This is the Autobiography of Everett from the Eels. This is Things the Grandchildren Should Know. One of the best music memoirs I've ever read. Fantastic book. This is an incredible book. Dylan Goes Electric. You can see how scruffy it is. I took that away with me on holiday. By Elijah Wald, who's also written a great book on Robert Johnson as well, which I'll show in due course. This traces Dylan's evolution from being a folk singer to his famous performance at Newport when he plugged in his electric guitar and offended everybody, offended all the folkies. But it contains an absolute wealth of information. Where would my videos be without a squeeze book? Jim Drury and Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford presents their complete career, talking about the songs. Not a bad book, could have been better. Todd Rundgren, A Wizard of True Star, that one written by Paul Myers. Takes you through his complete career as a producer and as a solo artist. This is a marvellous little book, Donald Fagen, Eminent Hipsters. It's a collection of music journalism, which he wrote back in the day, maybe in the 60s, interspersed with some autobiographical pieces and also a section of his tour diary from when he was on tour with Michael McDonald. And those sections are very funny and entertaining. He comes across as quite curmudgeonly, but it's a great read. Written before the sad death of Walter Becker. A short book, but extremely well written. Another squeeze one. This is Chris Difford's recent autobiography, which is good fun, although there are certain gaps in his memory and he does get certain facts wrong, but we can forgive him for that. I'm not showing my Beatles books, by the way. That's because I've already done a Beatles book video, which is over on my Beatles channel, so I'll link that down below. So if you want to see my Beatles collection, you can go and have a look at those there. This is one of my favourite autobiographies. This is Mac Rebennack, Dr. John, Under a Hoodoo Moon. This is a replacement copy. I went to see Dr. John play live in Manchester at I think it was the Bridgewater Hall, and I took my book along on the off chance of being able to get it signed by him. Didn't get it signed, and I ended up leaving it on my seat when I left, so I had to buy a replacement copy. So somewhere out there, there is my original copy of that. Really entertaining book, traces his development from the New Orleans kind of club scene all the way through to international success on the LA session music scene and beyond. Has some nice photos. That's Dr. John. Whenever I look at this guy, he always reminds me of, well, there's two people on the VC. Steve Whitty, when he used to have his big beard, and also Headley. He always reminds me of Headley as well for some reason. This is the biography of Robert Wyatt, Different Every Time, by Marcus Adair, which is a very interesting book, actually. It traces his affiliations with the British Communist movement, and there's some good commentary about the music. Robert Wyatt, of course, the original drummer with Soft Machine, who plunged out of a window when he was in his 20s and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, but still went on making music. He was a drummer, and he wasn't able to play drums anymore, so he turned himself into a songwriter. Okay, what else have we got? Back to Bill Bruford again. This is the Autobiography of Bill Bruford. Very interesting book indeed. He intersperses his life story with a fair amount of musical theory. It's almost a kind of academic book in a way, but it tells the story in a very funny, ironic kind of way. Great guy. Drummer from Yes and King Crimson, of course. This is a fantastic book. Good Night and Good Riddance, How 35 Years of John Peel Helped to Shape Modern Life, by David Cavanaugh. This book tells the story of John Peel's influence on music, and it's quite astonishing. He goes through and just, he does it session by session. He doesn't do all the sessions that John Peel did, of course, but he goes through Peel's career, the John Peel show and the Perfume Garden and all the various shows that John presented over the years. And he basically makes a case for how utterly vital John Peel was, and the roll call of bands and artists that John Peel discovered and nurtured really is quite amazing. From the Ramones through to the Smiths, and it just makes you realise what a completely different musical landscape we would exist in had John Peel played those artists that nobody else played. Fantastic book. This is another great one. Sorry, where is it? Just dropping books on the dog. This is John Savage, England's Dreaming, which is a very readable and entertaining account of the genesis of punk and the Sex Pistols and London in the mid-70s. Focuses a lot on Malcolm McLaren and how he came to get the Pistols together and so on. You can see how big it is as a book. It's kind of known as a classic, really, that one. This is a recentish book sent to me by 6-inch pianist John Downing. Tells the story of the recording of Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan. A simple twist of fate, written by Bob Dylan with Andy Gill, who's a music journalist, and Kevin Odegaard, who actually played on the album. Well thumbed already, you can see. This is a good Miles Davis biography, written by Ian Carr, the trumpet player who was in the band Nucleus. I went to see Ian Carr give a talk on Miles Davis, but I didn't get him to sign it. But that's a good book. I'm not saying much about these because, time is short. We have a biography of Yes, written by the perennial music journalist Chris Welch. That's a good one. That tells the story of how Chris Squire was always late back in the day. It used to drive Bill Bruford mad. Chris Squire, when they all shared a house together back in the early days, apparently Chris Squire would always have a bath and he'd lie in the bath all day and nobody would be able to get in the bathroom, and it would make Bill intensely cross. I've got a fair few Syd Barrett biographies. This was the most recent one. It's a very scholarly book. It traces, the influence of various poets and poetry and children's literature, but it also tells the story of Syd, his rise and fall, and it had some involvement from his family. I think his sister was interviewed for the book, so it gives a fairly considered account of his life. That one's by Rob Chapman. If I forget to give any of the authors' names, just contact me in the box below if there are any books that you're interested in and you want to buy them and I didn't say who they were by. Just let me know and I'll let you know the name of the author. John Bonham, A Thunder of Drums. This tells the story of Bonham's life. Again, this is by Chris Welch. It's not just pictures, it's text. Takes you through his life, talks about his influences, talks about his hell-raising and eye-watering story. full of testimony from his closest friends and people who knew him in the industry, people who saw the good side of him, people who saw the bad side of him. There are some truly horrendous stories in this book. He was definitely a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde figure, you know. So that one's by Chris Welch again and Jeff Nichols. We have Keith Richards' Autobiography, which came out a few years ago. Another eye-watering book. Some truly horrific stories in this book. I felt myself almost casting moral judgment on him at times, you know. Stories of when he was loading on drugs and he decided to just take his young son for a drive in the car and turn the car over and so on. It kind of makes you wonder almost why he wants to confess such stories, to be honest with you. I'm a big admirer of his work, but it's occasionally it was difficult to get through that book without thinking, you know, if I'd done that, I wouldn't be writing books about it. Let's have a look and see. Right, this is a fantastic book. Escaping the Delta, Robert Johnson by Elijah Wald again, the guy that wrote the Bob Dylan at Newport one. This is a fantastic book. If you want to understand about Robert Johnson, and by understand Robert Johnson, I mean get behind all the bullshit about him selling his soul to the devil and all that stuff, which was just basically invented in the 1960s. If you want to understand his true place in the blues and how he was perceived by his contemporaries and you know what his music was all about, you know, it traces the influences of his songs, the songs that he based his songs on and so on. It's absolutely fascinating. After I read this book, I spent ages on YouTube going back and listening to the songs which had been the models for the songs that he ended up writing, you know, because he was from a tradition, Robert Johnson. He didn't invent the stuff that he came out with, you know, he was plugged into a very particular tradition, and this book is an absolutely superb account of his musical evolution. Oh my goodness, I've got a bad knee today. I've got a bad knee generally. I'm a wreck. A book I read whilst on holiday in California, fantastic book all about muddy waters. Contains some truly brilliant passages of writing. Robert Gordon. It's one of those books, you read it and you just want to go straight back and listen to the music. And I never realised how many children he had with lots of different partners. Fantastic book. Bowie in Berlin, which tells the story of the 3 albums that Bowie produced in Berlin, and also it tells the story of the Iggy Pop albums as well, which he recorded there. That's good. That's by Thomas Jerome Scarborough, A New Career in a New Town. I'm getting through them. This is one of the first music books I ever actually bought. This is Pink Floyd, Saucerful of Secrets by Nicholas Schaffner. There is a more recent Pink Floyd biography. I can't remember who it's by. This one is very good, actually. If you haven't got a Pink Floyd book in your collection, you want one, and you see this going cheap, this is well worth picking up. It tells the story up until Momentary Lapse of Reason and the tour that followed. There might have been a subsequent repress of it, which brought the story up to date, I'm not sure, but Nicholas Schaffner, he describes himself as Pink Floyd's first American fan. He got an import of the first 2 Floyd albums in the States, he claims, before anybody else did. So that's a good one. This is a funny book. This is Philip Larkin's Jazz Reviews. Philip Larkin was a British poet, and he wrote some jazz columns for an English newspaper, and they're very entertaining. But he didn't like any modern jazz. He didn't like Charlie Parker. He didn't like John Coltrane. He was accused in later years almost of being racist in some of the comments that he made. But I like dipping into this. The chapters he writes on the jazz that he doesn't like are actually very entertaining. But he was basically a fan of the early jazz, Louis Armstrong and so on, and he didn't buy into bop music or bebop or free jazz, and he writes quite entertainingly about people like Miles Davis and so on, so that's quite good fun. Classic Dylan, The Chronicles. We're still waiting for volume 2. That was kind of meant to be the first instalment of his autobiography. Very good book. I'm sure I don't need to introduce that one to people. Right, let's have a look. This is a great pair of books. This is Song Man and Guitar Man. I think Guitar Man was the first one. Song Man was the second one. These are written by a guy called Will Hodgkinson, who was he was actually a music journalist working for the Guardian newspaper, and he got into his mid-30s and he decided he wanted to learn the guitar and stop being a music journalist and start being a musician. So he bought a guitar and started taking lessons, and what he's aiming for in this book is to play the song Angie by David Graham in public. And the song ends with him doing that, but it's a very entertaining account of him trying to get to grips with the guitar. And because he's a music journalist, he has this incredible address book of people that he can go and talk to and get guitar lessons from. So he ends up having guitar lessons from people like Johnny Marr and, you know, Roger McGuinn and, you know, real eye-watering stuff. And then in the follow-up, he decides that playing the guitar is not enough for him and he wants to try and write a song. And in this one, he goes and talks to all kinds of songwriters, you know, incredible roll call of people. Yeah, just a really good, if you want a stocking filler for Christmas, I mean, it's a bit late now, but maybe for next year, and you want just a really good, entertaining pair of books to read, stick those on your list. Okay, what have we got? That's the Beatles, don't want that. A collection of the music journalism of Lester Bangs, the famous American music journalist from the 60s, who used to get more loaded than the musicians he wrote about. He was a big fan of kind of scuzz rock and, you know, punk rock and so on, bands like the Fugs and so on, and, you know, all the garage rock bands, the Nuggets bands and so on. He had an extremely intense prose style, you know, he was one of those amphetamine-driven music journalists, but great to dip into. Lester Bangs, Psychotic Reaction, and Carburettor Dung. We're getting there. This is a book which I've tried to read this book over the years, and it's rather dry. It was based on a PhD thesis. It's by Charlie Gillett, who was a very well-respected music broadcaster and journalist. He had a show in London for many years on Radio London, and he became a great championer of world music. He was one of the people who originally came up with the term world music, and he put out a very good series of compilations in the 2000s on you know, world music. But this was his original, I think it was a PhD thesis he wrote, which he then turned into a book, and it just basically traces the origins and the story of how rock and roll came to be. So it starts off in the very, very early days, you know, pre-Elvis, and it goes through, I think it goes through to the late 1970s. It's quite a dry book, but it contains a wealth of information, you know, all sorts of great information. Sounds of the City. Ah, goodness gracious me. Phil Collins's Autobiography. 6 out of 10 for that one. Another Genesis one, Behind the Lines. That's quite a good book. That's quite informative. Goodness gracious, I'm making such a mess in here now. A good little primer on Dark Side of the Moon by John Harris, who is a music journalist working for the Guardian newspaper. A slim book, but worth reading. The Story of the Blues by Paul Oliver. I read this back in my 20s when I was getting into the blues. Paul Oliver is an internationally recognised authority on the blues. You know, he knows his stuff. That kind of really does roll the story right back to the days of slavery and so on. And it's an interesting book. It's one that I need to revisit. I haven't read it for a long time. Crim, The Mighty Crim. This is King Crimson by Sid Smith, In the Court of King Crimson. I think it's an official authorised biography. I think he actually spoke to all the members of the band as Bruford is interviewed in there, and Fripp and so on. So that's worth checking out. This book, I bought this in America. I bought this in San Francisco. It's another Robert Johnson book. And this one, it's basically debunking, again, the whole Crossroads devil myth. It's quite interesting. I saw it in a bookshop and just thought it looked fantastic. So I thought I'd get it. And yeah, great cover, isn't it? We are nearly there, people. Simon Reynolds, Rip It Up and Start Again. Great music journalist. This is his history of post-punk. Well worth a read. He talks about Pill, Joy Division, Talking Heads, Throbbing Gristle, Scritti Politti, Gang of Four, Devo, Cabaret Voltaire, The Slits. I think you get the idea. There is another compendium of outcuts from it here somewhere, which I can't put my finger on. Here it is. This was the interviews that he wrote or that he conducted in order to write this book. So this book came out first, and then this one was a set of interviews with all those people. So taken together, that's the only history of post-punk that you need, really. The Syd Barrett one, short and sweet, Crazy Diamonds. I think there was some controversy over that one. I think some claims were made in the book about him which his family didn't like, I think anyway. Captain Beefheart by Mike Barnes, which I've had this for many years. There's dust on here. That tells the story of the good captain's career from start to finish, but it doesn't go up to his death, I don't think. Another John Cale book, this one by Tim Mitchell, a biography. And then this one, a similar format. This is Brian Eno, his music and the vertical colour of sound by Eric Tam, which is a fairly scholarly account of his work, a little bit on the dry side, but a good one to dip into if you're listening to a bit of Brian and you want to know about the history and the context of how he came to write that music. Great little book on Marvin Gaye. This tells the story of what's going on. This one is by Ben Edmonds. Kind of gives you a potted history of Marvin's life, but it also explains in depth about the making of the What's Going On album. It's a nice one. Another Pink Floyd for you. This is a collection of articles from various magazines and fanzines through the eyes of the band, its fans, friends and foes, edited by Bruno MacDonald. Kate Bush. What more needs to be said? Costello. This is a guy that doesn't get much love on the VC, Mickey Newbury. He wrote songs for Elvis Presley and all sorts of big country stars. I have a fair few of his records, so I thought I'd get a biography of him. What a nice picture. I just made an XTC video, which some people may have watched, and I used these books for that. This one is a kind of song by song, Neville Farmer and XTC, with contributions from the band, and that one also has contributions from the band as well. Chalk Hills and Children, the definitive biography by Chris Toomey. That's all the XTC you'll ever need, although there is a new one apparently. There is a new XTC book, so I'll have to get that. And we'll finish with this one. Kiss, Behind the Mask, the authorised biography by David Leaf and Ken Sharp. That's probably the most well-read, well-thumbed book in my collection. I just love it. It's just full of information, full of great quotes from all the band, you know, Ace Frehley and Peter Criss. It's just fantastic. You can see how much I've read it. The cover's hanging off. You know, I don't buy music books just to sit on the shelf. I do tend to read them, and if I love them, I tend to almost destroy them, you know, so I need to get a good copy of that again. So, that isn't it. You know, there are more books. I've got a big chest here, which I keep books in because I don't have enough shelf space. So if I was to open this chest, and I can't because there's a drum kit piled up on it, but if I was to open the chest, I would be able to produce a lot more music books for you. But we're on half an hour, so and I'm now surrounded by mess, so I think I'll leave it there. So thank you once again to the two people who requested Bazcar and Audiosaurus. Thanks guys, that was a good prompt forcing me to finally do this. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too much of a kind of, you know, too fast. So that's it for now. I will see you very soon. Have a great day. Live long and prosper.